1 year has passed since the 13th Everchosen was crowned, and the fierce men of Norska marched for the mountains of the Norse Dwarfs, expecting an easy victory. But a surprise volley of flaming oil arcs down upon them from the cliffsides. Expertly hidden behind a thin veil of ice, flame cannons unleash gouts of molten fire upon the barbarians, drenching them in hellfire and putting an immediate halt to the invasion. This was a stark reminder of the might of the Dwarven military and why their war machines were so feared. Welcome to the second in our video series on the races of the Warhammer world, where we will cover the Dwarf armies. When the Thanes call to gather the throngs, it is the clans that answer, for they have bonds stronger than Gromril. Description of the Way of the Clans. Contrary to popular belief, the Dwarves did not have a true standing army. Organization of their fighters came through a reliance on the clans throughout the Karazhan Corps. When the call to arms was made, the clan's Thane formed a militia. That militia rallied with other militias under a common banner. Together they built an army or throng led by officials from all corners of society. Very rarely were the throngs led by a king. Since they only marched when the need was absolutely dire, military command was assigned to Dwarf lords. These were Thanes promoted to Supreme Commander, often through strict scrutiny of who had the best tactical capabilities and longest beard. Since Dwarfs could not use the winds of magic in conventional ways, Rune Lords and Runesmiths provided magical support during war. Before battle, they sealed runes into armor and weapons. In the fray, they channeled hostile spells and dampened their harmful effects. It made them ideally suited for targeting and destroying enemy casters. Though many factions outclassed them in spellcasting, Dwarf armies had technology without equal. The chiefs of steam, gunpowder and locomotion were the master engineers. Even while war thundered around them, they fearlessly directed and repaired war machines. They often joined the front lines, outfitted with an arsenal of gadgets and explosives. From there they barked orders for bombardments on priority threats. On the rare instances when Dwarf kings marched, they stood high above the ranks atop a shield. The shield was carried by hand-picked retainers called shield bearers. When the High King was on the field of battle, he was carried instead upon the throne of power by throne bearers. The presence of their gold-clad patriarchs inspired the throngs with a stubborn will to fight, even when the odds were stacked against them. Utterly loyal they was, not come and go as you please like some folk I could mention. Sturdy fighters, respectful of their thanes and kings, sworn to lay down their lives in the defense of the hold. Staunch in the face of the greatest dangers. Stand fast against anything they would. Nary a dragon or a great demon would cause them to raise an eyebrow, and perish the cur who thought of saving his own life before protecting his kinsman. Durgrim Redmane, Hammerer. The rallying call of their Thane ushered streams of Dwarf infantry from the mountains. The equipment and armor that craftsmen employed on their workdays were just as suitable for warfare. Throngs could mobilize in no time at all. Dwarf warriors were the bulk of Dwarf infantry. They needed only to fetch an axe and shield before leaving the keep. Miners preferred to keep their sharp pickaxes and blasting charges. Much of the military strategy of Dwarfs relied on an unbreakable front line to absorb charges. The soldiers at the forefront were Longbeards, the most seasoned and battle-hardened veterans of the clan. Under heavy armor, they formed an unbreakable shield wall. Nearby beardlings were inspired to fight and prove themselves to their elders. Since the underway became dilapidated, underground warfare was common. Goblins and Skaven notoriously exploited the ruins to quietly move armies under mountains. They frequently clashed with shieldbreakers, the elite packs of subterranean soldiers. Beardlings seeking honor enlisted to aid the ceaseless marches through tunnels. When larger throngs needed to navigate the underways, shieldbreakers were an invaluable vanguard. Ironbreakers were the most heavily armored infantry. Like the shieldbreakers, they guarded the deepest and least visited parts of underground strongholds. The warriors awaited any intrusions from below, armed with full Gromril suits and rune weapons ready. Leaders of the Ironbreakers were called Ironbeards. His duty was to guide his unit into favourable positions and bark out battle formations. Dwarf melee infantry was armoured and slow, but this was not true in the case of the Slayers. When a Dwarf believed that their honour had been stained beyond redemption, they shed their armour and became death and destruction personified. At the Shrine of Grimnir, they ritually shaved their head into a dyed orange crest. Seeking doom for themselves or their chosen foe was the only path to reclaiming their honour. Slayers were a flurry of axes and markedly faster than armoured dwarfs. Their prestige grew for every monster they killed. It earned them titles such as Troll Slayer or Giant Slayer. With the title came roles of leadership. Greatest of all were the Dragon Slayers or Demon Slayers, saved only for dwarfs who fell the most ferocious creatures and survived to share their tale. If a Slayer took his death oath to a fanatical next step, he became a Doom Seeker. Axe heads were attached to chains instead of handles and secured to his wrists. Due to their unhinged methods of combat, these weapons were appropriately named the Whirling Blades of Death. The tattoos on their bodies doubled as protective wards to nullify hostile magic. Doomseekers fought alone as crazed lone wolves and punched through enemy lines. If a king arrived, each unit supplied the best of their fighters to form his bodyguard. Called hammerers, they surrounded the king like walls of a fortress. The striking of their Gromril hammers rang out in a percussive melody not so different from the booming song of industry. Dwarf front lines were known to cheer at their arrival and bang their weapons against their shields to amplify the sound. According to legend, the Sky Titans were the earliest known users of black powder, but the Dwarves were the first to use the substance for purposes beyond fireworks. Thunderers were the original unit approved by the Engineers Guild to wield handguns on a large scale. A coordinated discharge from the handguns was often mistaken for the distant roar of a storm. Their accuracy was lethal, and their ammunition packed enough punch to shred through most armor. However, their range was outmatched by their rivals in the Quarrelers. Dwarves first crafted the crossbow as a size-appropriate improvement over the unwieldy elven bows. The increased stopping power and versatility of their weapons made Quarrelers excellent armored skirmishers. They aimed to outflank and outrange enemy missile units. Once their enemies had thinned, the stragglers were left to the melee infantry. While most clans remained in a hold, some wandered the wilderness. The Rangers wandered wild valleys as an independent militia. At their disposal were crossbows, throwing axes, and even more axes for close encounters. In any skirmish, their first order of business was to warn the main Dwarf army. They trailed their targets and waited for the main armies to meet, and then surprise ambushed war machines or lone wizards. When handguns and crossbows weren't sufficient firepower, the response was to use flamethrowers. Iron Drakes were ironbreakers trained in the use of Drake guns, a powerful spewer of white-hot alchemical fire. Gromril armor struggled to protect its users from the intense heat, so Runesmiths crafted empowered armor for the Iron Drakes. They were nearly impervious to flame, even capable of withstanding Skaven warpfire throwers. Some Drake guns fired Tollhammer torpedoes. The munitions were cone-shaped, spiked missiles that hit like a crashing meteor. My ancestors' thieves? Why, you no-good grubby lover. It was my great-great-grandfather who designed the machine, and he built in one fatal flaw, one fatal weakness, without the removal of which it would never work. It's not my fault that your ancestor died trying to fly it. Dwarf engineer Thorn to his companion Doirin. As the battlefield sang with striking hammers and booming firearms, revolutionary Dwarf war machines took to the skies. Gyrocopters were the first technological marvels of their kind in the world to achieve flight. They used a rotor-blade steam engine for vertical takeoff and landing, and they were even able to hover in one place. Good tactics enabled the Dwarves to strike anywhere on the battlefield. The outfitted weaponry often included a small rapid-fire cannon or a brimstone gun at the front of the aircraft. Alternatively, some gyrocopters were fitted with lighter kits, so they could drop explosive payloads in bombing runs. Though they were deadly, the machines were costly and rare. Operation and maintenance were reserved only for members of the Engineers Guild. The sister aircraft of the gyrocopter could easily be pointed out by the enormous shadow it cast upon the land. The Thunder Barge was a dangerously imperfect warship, piloted by only the most insane or inebriated engineers. Its design consisted of a single barge raised aloft by twin dirigibles. The vessel sported plentiful swivel guns, cannons, and a crew armed with double-barrel shotguns. Thunder barges drifted over enemy infantry and dropped bombs from their underbelly. But because of its inferior speed compared to gyrobombers, at the cost of tearing the aircraft apart, Bugman's ale could be ignited to trigger the Thunderburner within its engine and make a quick escape. Less machine and more beacons of raw power were the Anvils of Doom. Made by ancient runesmiths in the heart of a volcano, the devices of solid Gromril were covered in runes. Veteran rune lords, capable of harnessing the sealed magic, placed them at the pinnacle of a hill overlooking all armies. Anvil guards protected the rune lord as he struck the runes and unleashed clouds of fire and lightning. No two anvils functioned the same. Each had a sealed boon that could be traced to their original dedication to one of three origins: Grimnir for fury, Grungi for effort, and Velaya for loyalty. On top of having the most advanced war machines, Dwarves had the largest roster of artillery in the known world. The Grudge Thrower was a favourite catapult to bring along on any campaign. Originally, they were created as simple stone throwers. During the War of Vengeance, they adopted a practice of inscribing grudges on the rocks. The tradition became a mainstay as the Dwarves entered wars with Greenskins and Skaven. An infamous variant was named the Goblobber. It used live, screaming goblins as ammunition instead of rocks. Axes could be used in place of stones by the experimental Goblin Hewer, but they were rarely used. The original blueprints were rumoured to have been stolen and completed by the thief. At its unveiling, infighting broke out within the Engineers Guild. Because of its tarnished reputation, only slayers would agree to crew the machine. Nevertheless, the spinning axes they launched were effective without question, capable of cutting down several lines of enemy ranks with one barrage. Dwarf engineers were in a constant contest as to who could create a ballista with the greatest range and best loading speed. They called these ballistae bolt throwers, and had relied upon them for generations to fell wyverns or trolls. It was an inexpensive machine to make, and reliably accurate. In underground conflicts, bolt throwers were favoured for their lack of gunpowder smoke that obscured visibility and choked the tunnel's finite breathable air. Still, for all their bumbling about, they certainly know how to make good cannons. You'll rarely see a dwarf cannon blow up, not like those shoddy, cheap, oversized pop guns that the men of the Empire are so proud of. Great cannons. Bah. Durgrim Redmane, Hammerer. Cannons were the uncontested favourite artillery of the dwarves. Their firepower toppled beasts and shattered even the most heavily armoured combatants. Dwarf holds relied on cannons as the first line of defence, but could be relocated to a field battle. Many cannons were very old, but maintained faithfully by their long-standing crewmen. Engineers created a variant of cannons that used a dangerous brew of hot oil and molten tar as ammunition. As it was pumped into the barrel, the pressure inside built near to the point of bursting. At exactly the precise moment, a cannoneer placed a wad of burning oil and the pressure was released. On impact, the arcing fire melted flesh in the blink of an eye. Only a charred skeleton and foul-smelling goo remained. So lethal were the flame cannons that they were known to rout survivors of hostile units in a single volley. Yet another version of the cannons, the organ gun, was inspired by the musical instrument. The pipes were laid flat and converted into barrels. The engineers liked the design so much that many more models were made and deployed in war. The barrels were smaller and lighter than standard cannons, but capable of firing multiple shots before needing to reload. One organ gun could accomplish the task of many cannons, but at the price of reduced range and firepower. As the ancestor gods were venerated, so too were the living kings and heroes that led the military. Some were the unbroken bloodline to those who came before, others a paragon of the Dwarven ideal. When at the helm of a throng, their presence roused an unshakable confidence. That which is wrong with the world that we cannot fix with the blades of our axes, we shall surely avenge. Thorgrim Grudgebearer, High King of the Karazhan-Kor. From his throne of power in Karazhan-Karak, Thorgrim was an incarnation of the High Kings of old, a royarch eager for conquest and notoriously merciless to his enemies. However, Thorgrim was not known to be reckless and firmly upheld the ancient traditions of his people. His days were busy brooding on how best to restore the Karazhan-Kor to its former glory, or scribing new offences into the great book of grudges entrusted to him. He vowed to right every wrong penned into the pages. In battle, his throne bearers towed him on the throne of power, whilst he brandished two enchanted rune axes, an axe of Grimnir and the Grudge Settler. Thorgrim was protected by powerful runes, sealed within the armour of Skeldor. His participation on the battlefield was very rare, but it did not stop him from spearheading an age of reckoning. I fear there is no foe worthy of my death. Ungrim Ironfist, Slayer King of Carrick Kedrin. Ungrim was both a slayer and a king, sired from a dwarf 5 generations his senior. The exact cause of his ancestors' decision to take the Slayer Oath was not recorded. It was commonly understood that it involved the death of his daughter by the dragon Skaladrak, while on her way to marry the son of the High King. Ungrim carried the burden of his forebear's vow. But his cause to seek battle was to avenge his only son. War was waged at even the slightest offences. Unafraid, he would charge into risky skirmishes with a weapon tempered with dragon's blood, called the Axe of Dargo. The Slayer crown atop his head had massive horns, and a crest even more dramatic than other Slayers. Sweeping behind him was the dragon cloak of Fierskar, a gift from Thorgrim Grudgebearer, made from the slain offspring of Skaladrak. I came here hoping to take it all back. I came hoping to look upon the far deeps, on the ancestor statues of the Abyss of Iron's dream. I dreamed of opening up the Ungdrin again, so that armies might freely march between my, Cazador's and Thorgrim's realms. I dreamed of reopening the mines, of filling the coffers of our clan with gold and jewels. Belegar Ironhammer, King of Carrick Eight Peaks. Known as the true King of Carrick Eight Peaks, Belegar reigned over a kingdom permanently locked in a siege. He was a descendant of the last dwarf to rule the peaks before its fall, and the leader of Clan Angrand. When the dwarfs were shored out of the Eight Peaks, their enemies swooped in to try and claim the wealth of the city for themselves. But Belegar alone was able to match wits with his two sworn enemies, Sarsnick the Night Goblin and Skaven warlord Queek Headtaker. His experience in the tunnels of Eight Peaks made him a master of subterranean warfare. On his campaigns, he took the Hammer of Angrand, a weapon passed down from the first kings of Clan Angrand. The runes upon his Shield of Defiance have saved his life many times. It famously spared him twice over from being eaten alive by Skarsnick's giant pet cave squig Gobbler. I swear I never saw a beard so white or gold as on the features of Grombindel. Veteran Quarreler. The White Dwarf was a dwarf so old that his tale was memorialized in the many hundred verses of the saga of Grombindel. He had appeared many times in history when his people were most pressed for help. Nobody could predict his arrival. Yet still, beardlings and longbeards alike would leave a tankard of ale beside the fire, just in case the wandering legend made an appearance to turn the tides of battle. In every appearance he made, the tide of battle turned to the dwarf's favour. Some said that his true identity was Snorri Whitebeard, eldest son of Grungi and Valaya. Runesmiths that had observed him in battle identified his crown to be the rune helm of Zufbar, believed to have been lost. The armour Grombindel wore was made of a metal that could only have been made by the ancestor gods themselves. It was named Glimril Scale Armour when a single piece of it was recovered after the White Dwarf slew 10,000 Chaos Warriors at the Battle of Thrag. His axe is thought to have been one of the axes of Grimnir, and his rune cloak was undoubtedly woven by Valea herself. Thoric Ironbrow is a worthy role model for any of you that fancy yourselves as runesmiths. You could do a lot worse than try to impress him with your skill and understanding of the old ways, though it'll be right hard. He demands the highest standards and expects nothing less than your total commitment. Can't afford to mess with the power of an Anvil of Doom if you're all half-hearted. Durgrim Redmane. Thoric was a master runelord of Karazazul and one of the few keepers of an Anvil of Doom. His desire for excellence and perfection in runesmithing was second only to his burning passion to see the Karazhan core restored. Thoric spent many years crafting armaments for Belegar's campaign to retake Eight Peaks. He himself deployed the Anvil of Doom against Skaven pillaging the tunnels. The armour he wore was inscribed with a rune of his design, the Master Rune of Gromril. It was so effective at repelling damage that he had walked unscathed through a belching of dragonfire. Clad Brakak was his hammer for shattering enemy armour. The Rune of Fury, also his design, was sealed onto the weapon. Wait till you see what it does. Malachi Makaisen. Otherwise known as Mad Makaisen, Malachi was a deranged Slayer engineer. Famous for the creation of weapons of questionable reliability, he was nonetheless embraced by the Imperial Academies for his genius. He took the Slayer Oath when his naval vessel, named the Unsinkable, sank on its maiden voyage, and his thunder barge, named Undestructible, exploded. The loss of Dwarven life caused his ejection from the Engineers Guild. Even still, he invented and innovated. The Thunderbarge Spirit of Grungi and the Goblin Hewer were both claimed to be his designs. In battle, he preferred a repeating handgun and optical lenses engraved with crosshairs. Rather than a supplement for any deficiency, Malachi insisted that it was a device to enhance his already superb eyesight. Whether they were defending their mountain holds or on campaign to settle a grudge, Dwarf militaries were respected for their formidable strength. Their foes were as plentiful as the recorded wrongdoings, but for their allies, they were a reliable friend, prepared to fight until the end times to preserve order. More videos on the races of the Warhammer Fantasy world are on the way, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Our videos would be impossible without our kind patrons and YouTube channel members, whose ranks you can join via the links in the description to know our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our Discord, and much more. This is the Wizards and Warriors channel, and we will catch you on the next one.